Hey, welcome to That One Time, the place for unforgettable moments and stories worth sharing. Funny, touching, surprising, just like life itself. Grab a seat, get comfortable, and let's dive in. There you see Irene, the pediatrician Catherine reassured in a confident tone, gently examining tiny Annie. Everything is perfectly fine with your daughter. The little one was barely 2 months old, but it seemed she had already grown a couple of centimeters since Catherine's last visit. Oh, thank God! The young mother breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you, Dr. Smith, for coming so quickly. As soon as I saw that rash, I immediately started imagining all sorts of horrors. I thought of everything. There's no need to torment yourself unnecessarily. No need to invent things, the pediatrician said, checking the baby's tiny hands and feet one last time. It's better to call me right away. Otherwise, you'll wear yourself out and make the baby anxious with your state. And they feel everything, even though they're still so tiny, don't they? Catherine smiled at the little one, and the baby cooed back happily. Oh, what would we do without you here? Irene exclaimed sincerely, placing a hand on her heart. How wonderful that they send such wonderful and responsive specialists to us in such a remote place. Catherine didn't reply, just smiled politely and began packing her medical bag. This year she turned 35, but she had been living and working in Yelchika, a village lost in the Siberian taiga, for almost 2 years. Catherine had been allocated a small, light-filled house and her own office in the local clinic, the only one for many dozens of kilometers around. Despite being a native Muscovite, accustomed to completely different conditions both in work and daily life, the modest and at times harsh reality of the Siberian hinterland didn't frighten Catherine at all. In this kind of existence, she found a certain special spiritual depth, akin to what monks felt in their ascetic cells in ancient monasteries. Dr. Smith! Dr. Smith! Wait! The pediatrician heard a familiar voice behind her. Vera Roberts, a fair-haired, good-natured woman who worked on the local farm, hurried towards her, carrying a heavy enamel churn. Vera, please, you mustn't run like that. You might fall, Catherine said, watching the woman rushing towards her. What could happen to me? She waved her hand brightly. We're all used to it here, Vera replied, catching her breath after her quick pace. Sometimes you rush to the cow before dawn, thinking, just let everything be all right with her, especially if she's expecting a calf. Dr. Smith, I've brought you some fresh milk. The yield was especially good today. The village resident handed Catherine the churn. Oh, Vera, really, you shouldn't. The doctor tried to refuse. However, the milkmaid showed surprising persistence. Take it, she shook her head. I have plenty of this stuff at home, you know, and you need it more. You have such important work. You treat our children, making rounds from morning till night. For you, not just milk, nothing is too much. Do you know what the doctor was like before you? Vera almost spat with annoyance, recalling the previous pediatrician. She basically didn't care about the children. She only came to the hospital to gossip, spread all the rumors, smear her face with all sorts of cosmetics, and then start flirting with our paramedic. Catherine quickly took the churn and thanked the milkmaid. She had a feeling that Vera was about to ride her favorite hobby horse again. And so it happened. But no matter what that Petersburg goat did, Vera continued, getting worked up, no matter how hard she tried to charm him, our Mr. Spencer didn't even notice her. No matter what. I understand, Vera, but I really must go now. I still have a pile of papers to check at the hospital. But Vera couldn't be stopped. She couldn't calm down until she had expressed all her thoughts and feelings completely. Such was her broad, rural nature. Mr. Spencer is a bird of a completely different feather. He's that, what do you call it? The woman stumbled for a second, searching for the right word. Ah, I remember. He needs a completely different kind of girl. Vera looked at Catherine with cheerful cunning and finished, he needs to find a wife like you, quiet, calm, who dotes on children. The young pediatrician blushed, feeling the color flood her face up to the roots of her hair. Vera, please, you really shouldn't. Dr. Smith, you should take a look at him. Ever since Mr. Spencer lost his wife Susie, he's been grieving for 5 years now. The local crowd doesn't suit him. He came to us from the capital too, back in the day." At that moment, Catherine genuinely wanted to disappear into the ground. Quickly muttering something about being short on time, she thanked Vera for the milk once more and hurried away from Roberts. Everyone, literally everyone in the village, was trying to matchmake her with the local paramedic, Arthur Spencer. Catherine didn't argue. He was a handsome man, tall, broad-shouldered, with a dignified gait, and only 5 years older than her. However, despite the attention Mr. Spencer himself showed her, Catherine didn't reciprocate his feelings. For her, the handsome widowed paramedic was just a pleasant colleague who didn't stir any emotions in her soul. And how could it be otherwise when another person, her own husband, was forever settled in the young pediatrician's heart? Catherine quickly tried to shake off the sad thoughts, especially since the modest building of their village hospital, painted in beige and light gray tones, was already visible ahead. As she climbed the steps of the porch, the woman couldn't help but think how lucky she was that the local residents had accepted her so warmly and friendly. It was known that not every outsider, especially one from Moscow, could win the trust of villagers. Catherine, however, had managed to become practically one of their own. This was largely due to her dedication to her work. And now, upon entering her small, cozy office, she wanted to immediately start filling out papers when her attention was drawn to a huge, lush bouquet standing on the table. Someone had already put the flowers in a vase, and a wonderful fresh scent filled the room. "Oh no, not this again!" flashed through the pediatrician's mind. "I've asked so many times." "Dr. Smith, knock knock, may I come in?" Mr. Spencer, flashing an ideal white smile, slowly squeezed between the door and the frame. "Good morning to you too, Mr. Spencer." Catherine forced a polite smile onto her face. "I assume these flowers are from you? Do you like them?" He decided to try and lift her spirits a little. "You've been looking quite sad lately. Is everything all right?" Catherine placed the churn under the table and exhaled confidently. "Couldn't be better. But you shouldn't have spent so much." She shifted her gaze to the bouquet. "Simply wishing me a good day is enough. We've already discussed this, Mr. Spencer. I am categorically against any signs of attention in the workplace, and outside of work too, for that matter." Spencer's smile faded slightly. However, the man wasn't about to give up without a fight. "You know, Kathy, sometimes I think you're deliberately teasing me," the paramedic said, his face unchanged. "I just don't understand why you're doing this to me, honestly. I'm even running out of ideas of what else I could do to please you." Catherine looked tiredly at her persistent admirer. "Arthur, how much longer? How else can I explain to you that there can be nothing personal between us? I understand it's difficult for you to accept that I don't want to date you, but let's face it. We simply want different things from life. Our personalities don't match. What can you do?" The young doctor looked pleadingly at the paramedic. She had lost count of how many times she had tried to explain these seemingly simple things to him. "Is it because you still love your husband?" he asked a painful question. Spencer knew that Catherine didn't like to remember her past life in Moscow, and yet he never missed an opportunity to remind her of the reasons for her move to Yelchika. The woman's face instantly became impassive. "I'm sorry, Mr. Spencer, but I really am very busy right now. I'm afraid we have nothing more to talk about." "I understand your feelings like no one else, Catherine. Believe me, I've been in your shoes," Spencer said in a serious tone. "However, sooner or later, you'll have to return to real life. Sometimes you just have to accept that the closest, dearest people leave. By letting go of the situation, you'll finally be able to look around and see that there are people nearby who care about you. I'll be waiting for you, Catherine. I hope you'll soon understand that you and I have every chance of creating a wonderful family." Catherine looked at the paramedic, her lips trembling and her eyes full of tears. "Arthur, please," the woman cried out, paling, unable to control her emotions, and then simply broke down sobbing like a woman, burying her head in her hands. "Cry, Kathy, cry," Spencer said quietly, leaving the office. "Maybe tears will sober you up. How long can you pretend to be a steel lady?" The woman didn't answer. She simply couldn't speak, so the paramedic had to leave her finally in the solitude she so desired. Catherine's mood was completely and irrevocably ruined. The rest of the day, the pediatrician spent filling out medical charts for her tiny patients and their mothers, as well as seeing babies at the clinic. The young woman tried to behave as usual, friendly and polite. However, her heart ached. A familiar dull pain mixed with strong anxiety began to gradually fill her heart from the moment Arthur forced her to remember her husband again. "George!" She addressed him mentally every time her soul became unbearably heavy. "I believe we will meet again. Let others say whatever they want. Let them remind me however they want that you are probably no longer alive. I don't believe it. I don't believe it, and I never will. You are so strong, so brave. You couldn't have just—" In the evening, getting ready for bed, Catherine sat for a long time in front of the mirror, looking at her face, drawn from heavy thoughts and worries. Who would have thought that in just 3 years, the young, once energetic Catherine would turn into a woman dried up by grief, whose gray hairs, shimmering like silver threads in her once perfect dark blonde hair, made her look much older and more serious than she was. The young pediatrician loved to read before bed, not professional literature, but the most popular fiction she could get her hands on. Fortunately, in those days, living in the capital, the girl had no shortage of books. Here, the most she could afford was the journal Herald of Medicine, and that was by subscription, which she had so thoughtfully arranged at the post office the same day she moved to the village. Not a single online store delivered books to such a distant and remote region. And to be completely honest, Catherine no longer felt drawn to intricate detective stories or magical adventures in romance novels that she once loved so much. The world had long lost its colors for her, and only work somehow kept her afloat. Immersing herself completely in the problems of newborns and their young, and sometimes not so young, mothers, Catherine thus stifled her own pain, which stung her heart every time she remembered that she herself could not have children. Catherine got up from the table where the small mirror stood and caught a glimpse of how thin and unremarkable her figure had become. The expression that loneliness dries up a woman who loves described her perfectly during that difficult period of her life. She was lonely and she loved. She loved with all her soul and all her heart, selflessly and boundlessly, one single person who, most likely, was no longer alive. But pediatrician Catherine Smith could not even entertain the thought, as Mr. Spencer had put it, of accepting and letting go. But despite all the darkest moments of her reflections, in that same heart where the persistent pain now surged, there remained a faint hope. A hope that lifted Catherine every morning and made her believe that one beautiful day she would still hear the familiar warm voice of her beloved husband. That night the woman could not close her eyes. Her thoughts kept returning to the past, to those wonderful and easy years when she and her husband were truly happy, and nothing overshadowed their quiet family joy. They made grand plans for the future and had no idea that all the happiness they had built with such effort and perseverance could collapse in an instant. Catherine felt tears streaming down her cheeks again. "Oh my God," the woman whispered to herself. "George, my dearest, forgive me. I am such a sentimental fool." Before poor Smith's inner eye, bright pictures of the years spent with her husband involuntarily flashed again, gradually immersing her in a deep, yet simultaneously beautiful and sad dream, one that the healer of children's ailments herself would have preferred not to see at all, so as not to become even more emotional after the inevitable awakening. Once upon a time, Catherine had a completely different life. The bright lights of the capital, working in one of the best clinics in the city, meeting friends on weekends, and shopping in trendy boutiques. All this was an integral part of the young pediatrician's daily life. Catherine was born into a good, respected family of doctors. Her mother worked in gynecology her whole life, and her father was one of the leading surgeons at Scliff itself. The girl always had her parents as an example before her eyes. Strong, purposeful, they worked their way up and achieved everything themselves thanks to hard work and natural talents, as well as the desire to constantly learn and develop. But besides all that, they also loved each other madly. Having lived together for almost 25 years, they became a role model for their daughter. Catherine dreamed of continuing the noble medical dynasty, choosing pediatric medicine. Thus, she was able to combine her two passions in one profession, medicine and working with children. The girl studied easily and with pleasure, graduating from medical school with honors without difficulty, after which she immediately got a job in one of the best consultations in the city. From there, she gradually moved to an excellent private clinic where she worked for several years, improving her qualifications. She met George when she was already an adult and self-sufficient young woman. She was 26 then. The young rescuer completely captivated Catherine with his strength, masculinity, but at the same time his softness and kindness. Catherine had never met such an understanding man as George. At that point, she had already had several unsuccessful romances and had become disillusioned with the opposite sex, intending to devote herself entirely to her work. That year, she and a couple of colleagues from the clinic were sent on a general quota to so-called survival courses, and it was there that the girl first saw her future husband. The muscular, fair-haired instructor immediately made her heart beat faster. His neat 3-day stubble looked so natural, yet stylish, that Catherine couldn't help but wonder if he took special care of it to keep it in such an attractive state for women. Being naturally shy, Catherine didn't know if this amazing young man would notice her, so she just continued her training, trying to focus on the main reason she had been sent there. "So, you like our handsome instructor too?" Eugenia, her roommate in the staff dormitory for those attending the courses, and also a young gynecologist, teased Catherine. "And he's quite a guy, isn't he? Did you see how he carries himself with such dignity, as if he knows that if he beckons any of us, we'll immediately fall for him?" "Oh, stop it, Jenny!" Catherine brushed her off then, feeling the color flood her usually calm face. "What nonsense are you talking? He's handsome, of course, but nothing more." "Yeah, someone was staring at him with wide eyes when he was giving that dummy artificial respiration," her friend joked. "I bet you imagined him doing the same thing to you?" Eugenia rolled her eyes dreamily. But Catherine just winced, wrinkling her charming nose. "Ugh, Jenny, you're an adult, but you're behaving worse than a teenager, honestly. How disgusting!" "What's disgusting? Do you think if you play the saint, he'll immediately pay attention to you?" Jenny ran her fingers easily through her curly hair. "You need to be bolder, Kathy. Nowadays, men don't value modesty in women. They value what's scientifically called initiative." "Well, let others keep their initiative. I'm a fan of more classic courtship methods," Catherine replied calmly. "If we're meant to meet, he'll make his intentions known first. And I, as a decent girl, will then see if it's worth building a relationship with him, or if he's just frivolous, in a word." Eugenia shook her head reproachfully. "That's why Frankie and Nikita ran away from you, both with their heels flashing," she concluded good-naturedly. "You're too picky, and you think too long before making the first move. Look, Kathy, there are many other beauties hanging around here besides us. They might get ahead of you." "But I don't need him, Jenny. Calm down." Catherine flared up, unable to bear it, but immediately felt her heart beat anxiously, as if she was already jealous of this George towards some ephemeral other beauties her roommate had just mentioned. All right, I'm quiet." She smiled and, turning on to her other side, added, "Tomorrow is our final class. There's your chance. Use it or you'll miss your happiness again." Catherine didn't reply, just turned away towards the wall. Her face burned as if it had been rubbed with red pepper, and her heart beat like a gong in her chest, so much so that the girl thought Jenny would hear this strange sound in the silence of the night room. For the first time since her last breakup, and perhaps in her entire life, Catherine felt such strong emotions towards a complete stranger. "What nonsense!" the girl scolded herself. "You haven't exchanged a single word with him in these 2 weeks, and you're already picturing him as a fiancé. Silly girl, go to sleep. Jenny is right. Tomorrow is an important day, the last class, which you need to pass with flying colors. You didn't just come here for nothing, did you?" With such anxious thoughts, the girl fell asleep that night. Strangely enough, the next day passed completely calmly. Catherine passed the exam with a solid A and was getting ready to go with the other girls to a creative evening organized by the base staff. Just as the girl was critically examining herself in the mirror, trying to make sure the dress she had chosen wasn't too short, there was a quiet knock on the room door. "Come in, who is it?" the girl called out into the corridor, simultaneously adjusting her massive round silver and enamel earrings. Someone silently entered and stopped behind Catherine. The girl flinched, seeing a familiar yet unexpected reflection in the mirror. "Is that you? Oh my, you scared me!" Catherine exclaimed, turning around. Standing before her was the same instructor, George Smith, whom she had thought about so often in the past few days. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." The guy became flustered and shyly lowered his stunning blue eyes. In his hand, he held a small bouquet of wildflowers, which he shyly and slowly extended to the girl. "Here, these are for you. I'm sorry, I didn't know what kind of flowers you like, but the nature here is amazing, so I thought maybe the local flora would make you happy." Catherine looked up at him, her dark gray eyes wide with surprise. George's face gradually filled with a gentle blush, exactly like the one that must have appeared on her skin right now. "Oh, thank you. That's very kind," the pediatrician said, accepting the bouquet. "These are truly beautiful flowers, better than any roses, really." A timid hope lit up in George's eyes. "I was wondering, maybe you wouldn't mind going to the dance with me. We're having something like a disco at the end of the evening. It's funny, of course, grown men dancing to popular tunes, but still, I've been watching you since last week. Forgive my frankness, but Catherine, I really liked you, so I would very much like you to do me the honor of spending this evening with me as my companion." Catherine was speechless with delight for the first minute. To think the seemingly stern rescuer turned out to be such a gentle and sensitive person. It truly is impossible to guess what lies behind the facade of male brutality and outward calmness. It turned out that George had been experiencing the same feelings as Catherine all this time. "Oh, of course, I will do you that honor," the girl replied playfully and smiled sweetly at her chosen one. "Just promise me you won't smoke much. You know, there's nothing worse than a partner who has been smoking before dancing. I just really can't stand cigarette smoke." A bright and pleasant smile lit up George's face. "Oh, that wish I can easily grant," the young man said, imitating a fairy tale genie, "because I've never smoked and don't plan to start, so I obey and comply." The guy put his hands together in the characteristic genie gesture and bowed slightly. Catherine, at that moment, didn't know where to hide from embarrassment. "Oh God, forgive me for my tactlessness," the girl exclaimed. "I should have guessed that many of your colleagues lead a healthy lifestyle. It's just that both of my previous admirers weren't averse to having a cigarette from time to time, and I suffered terribly from it afterwards." Catherine looked into George's blue eyes and bit her tongue. What possessed her to mention past men? But today, the emergency service employee took her words with understanding. He didn't seem at all embarrassed by the mention of past romances. Offering her his arm, George, like a true gentleman, led her directly to the local community center, where the rescue service staff had already prepared a wonderful concert with jokes, poems, and even songs of their own composition. Catherine particularly liked the latter, and they made a great impression on her. That evening, the girl heard a real bard song for the first time. "Thank you for this wonderful evening," she thanked her companion when the dancing ended, and they, walking slowly under the blooming apple trees, reached the women's dormitory. "I haven't felt so, I don't know, so free perhaps, in a very long time. It was so easy to get away from everyday worries and the omnipresent hustle and bustle here." "Yes," George drawled, agreeing. "I always felt that this place has its own special energy. It's nothing special, just a regular base in the Moscow region. But once you drive a few kilometers from Moscow, it feels like a completely different world. No high-rises, no shopping centers at every turn. Just a calm and measured life, where everyone can find their true place." Catherine looked at George and couldn't believe her happiness. Here he was, a man who understood her inner state like no one else. No matter how much she loved the capital with its frantic pace, the bright, sometimes garish windows of cafes and shops, only here, many kilometers from Moscow, did she truly feel what life was. It was as if all her senses suddenly sharpened, giving her a secret yet simple knowledge. Every person has a true purpose. One only needs to follow it and the call of the heart, and then harmony and grace will surely come into life. Catherine. George looked at her unexpectedly seriously. Tell me, can we see each other again? Don't think me presumptuous. It's just that I feel something good could come of this between us. Of course, the girl calmly assured him. Let's exchange numbers. I'll write to you as soon as I get back to Moscow. A joyful and slightly childlike smile appeared on George's face, and Catherine's heart immediately fluttered, warmed by the nascent bright feeling. Returning to the capital, Catherine thought a lot about what this amazing trip had given her. Should she write to George herself, or was it better to wait until he was free and made the first move? Her doubts vanished when a few days later, a message arrived on her phone. I'll be in Moscow in a few days. Want to meet at VDNKH? Without thinking for a second and trembling all over with joy, Catherine immediately replied, Yes, I'll be eagerly waiting for you. In response, the girl received a playful smiley face, after which she breathed a sigh of relief. It seemed a new stage was beginning in her life. The first date was followed by several more, and soon the relationship became truly serious. It seemed George and Catherine couldn't spend a day apart. They constantly texted, called, and sent each other sweet postcards, just like young students who had just tasted their first true love. Less than 6 months later, George proposed to Catherine. The girl, of course, said yes, promising the young rescuer that she would make him the happiest man in the world. I'm the one who should be promising you such things, silly girl, George exclaimed in surprise. Remember, a man's duty is to take care of his woman and give her only love and joy, while also protecting her. You will never regret becoming my wife. Catherine's parents approved of their daughter's choice. George inspired confidence in them. He said the right things. And after a conversation with Stephen Smith, the girl's father, he became like family to them. Although I grew up in an orphanage, the guy confessed honestly, I understand well what a real family should be like. Catherine told me a lot about your relationship with Mrs. Smith. If I can come even a little close to something similar in my marriage with your daughter, I will be simply happy. It's good that you intend to make my daughter happy, Stephen Smith said. But what about your dangerous job? One day you might leave my Kathy alone, and what then? This question didn't faze George at all. All safety measures are observed at our base regarding transport and equipment. Monthly diagnostics are carried out, and in case of damage, parts or technically important components are immediately replaced. George spoke to his future father-in-law as if reporting on the state of a service facility to his superior, clearly, concisely, so that the man would have no doubt that his work, although risky, was provided with everything necessary to avoid that risk. As for Angelica Smith, she accepted her future son-in-law as her own son. The woman worried that George, having grown up in an orphanage, hadn't received enough maternal warmth in childhood, and so at every opportunity, she tried to feed him homemade pastries or hearty, rich soup. Here, Georgie, try this, Catherine's mother said, pouring the guy a bowl of her signature cabbage soup. I made it specially for you. I had a feeling you and Kathy would drop by today. George felt awkward refusing, although his mother-in-law's soups seemed a bit heavy for him. Thanking Mrs. Smith for the treat, he looked at Catherine with a laugh. She understood everything but couldn't stop the surge of maternal kindness. You probably never tasted soup like this, Angelica Smith continued to fuss. Catherine can make it too. Just don't forget to remind her often. Otherwise, with her work lately, she only eats on the go, and she shouldn't do that now. After all, she's getting married. She'll have to feed him properly now and eat well herself so you can have a baby quickly, and a healthy one at that. Mom! Catherine couldn't help but exclaim, blushing like a boiled lobster. That's enough! What baby? We're not even married yet. The registration is only in a month. Besides, George and I wanted to live for ourselves for a bit first, and only then think about children. An awkward silence hung in the air. George looked pointedly first at his fiancée, then at the disappointed faces of her parents. A bit. How long approximately will that be? Angelica Smith asked sadly. I hope you won't become one of those modern couples who think it's better to get 3 cats, a dog, and a parrot than to have a couple of healthy children. You're not like that, are you?" "What are you talking about?" "No, of course not," Catherine exclaimed. "How could you even think that? George and I are absolutely normal people, and we will definitely have children, just not so quickly. I want to work a bit more, after all, to establish myself as a specialist first." "My dear, but nothing prevents you from pursuing your interests in pediatrics and being a mother simultaneously," her father reasonably remarked. "We are no longer young and would like to cuddle grandchildren while we still have the strength." Catherine just wants to say, George unexpectedly intervened, that she and I have decided to wait a year or two until we fully understand that we are ready for a baby. No one is talking about depriving you of the joy of spending time with your grandchildren, Mr. Smith, he reassured his future father-in-law. "Well, if it's about that time frame, then all right," the father-in-law replied, chewing his lips. "Very well, live for yourselves for now. Just don't drag it out, okay? After all, Catherine is already at the most suitable age. You never know what complications might arise during pregnancy if she decides to give birth after 30. Catherine gripped her spoon with all her might. As much as she loved her parents, such anxiety about her condition and the possibility of having children caused a slight panic. The girl had always known she wanted to be a mother, but she wanted to decide for herself at what age and how it would happen. Her father and mother constantly pressured her, scaring her that her childbearing age had already crossed, in their opinion, reasonable boundaries. Catherine still had fresh memories of how upset Angelica Smith was when she broke up with her last admirer. Rather, the true reason for her upset was not her daughter's personal tragedy, but the fact that she hadn't thought to get pregnant by the guy to, as her mother put it, have a child for herself, and thus close the long-standing family issue. Catherine felt George squeeze her other hand under the table. His gaze seemed to say, "Calm down. This changes nothing. We will still do what we want." Catherine smiled at her fiancé and thought again how lucky she was to meet a person who truly understood her. The Smiths had a modest wedding. On the groom's side, there were only a few best friends from his unit. On the bride's side, there were friends, relatives, and a couple of good acquaintances of her father, specially invited from the Ministry of Health. Catherine and George decided not to have a lavish celebration. They planned to use part of the money they saved for the down payment on a mortgage. The young couple dreamed of their own apartment, as Catherine had been living with her parents all this time and George in a rented place. However, Angelica Smith and Stephen Smith presented the couple with a truly generous gift. "Here," the bride's father said to George, extending the keys to a brand new apartment. A 2-room apartment right in the center near the metro. 10 minutes, and Kathy can get to the clinic without traffic, and you'll also have a chance to shorten your commute to work a bit. George didn't know how to thank his father-in-law, and so he just hugged him tightly. "Thank you, Mr. Smith," the groom said sincerely. "If you only knew how grateful Kathy and I are." "It's nothing," the bride's father waved it off. "I'm doing this primarily for my daughter, so she can live more comfortably. Take care of her and don't forget about grandchildren. Your mother and I will be waiting very much," he reminded his son-in-law, playfully wagging his finger. Catherine, upon learning that they would now have their own apartment, shrieked with delight and threw her arms around her father's neck. "My beloved daddy," the girl said, kissing his cheek tirelessly. "You are the best, my dearest. How did you and Mom manage this?" "Well, we saved up a bit, I won't hide it," Stephen Smith said, blushing with joy for his daughter. "Mom and I decided to prepare a family nest for you in advance. We're not beasts. We know how hard it is for young people to earn their own housing nowadays." Catherine and George felt like the happiest people in the world at that moment. They looked confidently into the future and believed that a long and wonderful family life lay ahead. The first 2 years flew by for the young family like a single moment. Catherine worked at the clinic all the time, and in the evenings she turned into a desperate housewife, constantly cooking something delicious and unusual to please her husband, who returned late from his dangerous service. George was constantly away on calls. What extreme situations he hadn't been in. Catherine, of course, worried about her husband with all her heart and waited for his call with bated breath every time. However, thank God everything was all right. Despite the fact that George had to pull people out from under rubble, chase away absent-minded fishermen from thawing ponds, and do many other things. And then a joyful event happened in their family. One evening, when George returned from work, Catherine met him with eyes shining with happiness and cunning. "What is it, my dear? What happened?" her husband asked. "I have a surprise for you," Catherine confided and pulled him by the hand into the living room. There, on an elegantly set table, a festive dinner awaited George, one he hadn't had from his wife in a long time. In the center, on a large porcelain dish with painting, a large chicken baked French style in wine awaited him. Beside it, on a saucepan, lay boiled sweet potatoes with rhubarb and the freshest seafood, which Catherine had thoughtfully arranged on a separate plate. And on the other side of the table, in a tall vase, appetizing fruits were visible, and next to it stood a bottle of excellent wine and, for some reason, a carton of orange juice. "Wow!" George exclaimed sincerely. "What's the occasion for such a celebration?" The man kissed his wife and looked at her questioningly. "Did you get a promotion?" "Well," Catherine replied evasively, "you could say that. Just not the kind of promotion you're thinking of." "Oh? Interesting," the intrigued husband said, after which his wife sent him to wash his hands while she managed to lay out clean napkins. She really wanted this evening to be memorable for them for a long time. Everything had to be perfect for that. "So, what's the surprise?" George asked a little later when she had seated him at the table and placed steaming chicken on his plate. "I'm on pins and needles. I really want to know." George playfully clinked his fork and knife, showing that he was very hungry and waiting for an answer. "I'll tell you everything now, but first, please open the juice and the wine. I can have—" At first, George didn't understand the hint and calmly began unscrewing the wine cork with a corkscrew when it suddenly dawned on him. "Wait, why do you specifically want juice?" Catherine tried unsuccessfully to suppress a smile, feeling herself blush again. She covered her lips with her hand and looked at her husband expressively. "Are you saying you're pregnant?" George asked quietly. Catherine lowered her eyes, then nodded affirmatively. "Oh my God, Kathy! We're going to have a little one! My dear, my sunshine! What happiness! I'm going to be a father, do you understand? A father!" George almost dropped the bottle, trying to jump up from the table and hug his wife. When he succeeded, he twirled Catherine in a joyful waltz. The young woman laughed and didn't take her eyes off her beloved husband for a minute. "We have so much to do now," the man, excited with happiness, said hastily. "We need to decide where the nursery will be. Choose a crib. Have you told your parents yet?" "Not yet," his wife replied, shaking her lush hair and not stopping laughing. "We'll tell them together when we go to Mom and Dad's next weekend." George nodded understandingly. "Oh God, Kathy, I thought this was happiness. A loving wife and a hot dinner every day, a reliable home front, support. But this is something completely different. How much I love you, my dear. How much I love you." For the Smiths, exciting but wonderful everyday life began. Everything seemed to remain as before, but now every evening they did things together that were typical for all future parents. Together they chose a stroller, dreamed of how they would paint the wall where they would place the baby's cradle, argued about whether it would be a boy or a girl, and what name they would give the baby. One day, when Catherine was already 3 months pregnant, she and George decided to have a cultural outing and went to the theater. They were staging a new production of The Flying Dutchman, and Catherine really wanted to see it. The play impressed the young woman with its sets and the power of the actor's performance. The evening promised to be unforgettable, as after the theater George suggested going to a restaurant. "But after such a 3-hour spectacle, you and I definitely need to have something unusual to eat," George said happily to his wife as they left the Bolshoi Theater. "You must be terribly tired. I would be an awful husband if I made you cook something at home after all this. No, we'll go and eat somewhere nice." "If you do that, you'll be just the perfect husband," Catherine agreed. "Honestly, I'm ready to eat an elephant right now, or at least a hippo. Those tiny sandwiches in the theater buffet didn't impress me at all. Dinner was magnificent. Catherine was already preparing to remember this evening as one of the most beautiful in their life together when something completely unthinkable happened. The couple was already heading to the parking lot. George had called a taxi, and it was due to arrive any minute when three unfamiliar men blocked their path. Judging by their dilated pupils and the strong smell, these guys were clearly under the influence of alcohol or other substances, and all three of them had hands covered in tattoos that turned blue in the autumn twilight. "Hey guys!" one of them shouted to the others, and the whole group instantly began scrutinizing the Smiths. George immediately understood what was happening and raised his hands peaceably. "Hey guys, don't worry. Let's just go our separate ways like decent people. We don't need any trouble. Here." The rescuer took out his wallet from the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out all the cash. "That's all I have, guys, really. Take it and go with God. My wife and I just want to go home, that's all," George said as calmly as possible. However, Catherine, frozen with horror, felt with every cell of her body how tense her husband was. The tallest of the three, obviously the leader, glanced at the small amount. Then he took a couple of steps towards Smith and snatched the money with a quick movement. Like a monkey who had found a new toy, the convict jumped around happily in front of his henchmen. "Look, guys," he waved the bills. "People are understanding these days." "Well, I like it," the second one drawled in an unpleasant voice, then, for no reason, stared intently at the pregnant Catherine. "No fight, no girl for a quick one." A bald, stout man slowly stepped towards George's wife. "Oh, this woman is not bad at all in my opinion," the villain said. "Juicy." George instantly shielded his wife, and Catherine felt her mouth suddenly go dry. A second later, a nasty sour lump rose from somewhere in her throat, making the woman instinctively clutch her stomach where the life of their little child was beginning. Fear. A disgusting animal fear for her husband's life and their unborn son or daughter. That's what Catherine felt. She pressed herself against her husband's back, closing her eyes for a second. "Don't come near her!" George threw into his face and immediately took a fighting stance. "One move, and you can say goodbye to your worthless life." "Well, well, this pampered piece can talk too." The third criminal, who was muscular, replied instead of his comrade. "Try saying that again." With these words, the scoundrel pulled a gleaming folding blade, suspiciously resembling a razor, from inside his jacket. "What, not so brave now, huh?" the fat man asked, pointing at his friend's hand. "Now my buddies and I will quickly clean up your face so you know how to talk to respected people. And your girl is coming with us. Don't be afraid, it's not far, just to the nearest bushes." All three laughed like old hyenas. George seemed to turn to stone, ready for a deadly lunge. "When I say so, just run, without looking back," he whispered to his wife over his shoulder. "No, I'm staying here with you," Catherine whimpered plaintively into his jacket. "What are you doing, Bunny? Come out to the big uncles." The fat convict continued to coo in the meantime. "The uncles really want to play with you, so much so that they're about to finish off your boyfriend." Hardly had he finished speaking when all three lunged at her husband. "Run!" George shouted to his wife and immediately entered an unequal fight with the three ghouls. He delivered chaotic kicks and punches, trying to drive the convicts away. The man couldn't perform a single hold. He risked slowing down, which would have been fatal. Catherine darted somewhere to the right, hoping to get around the brute with the razor. However, he was quick-witted and immediately delivered a powerful blow to the woman's stomach. "Where are you running, you bitch?" The convict hissed and grabbed Catherine by the hair, pulling her close. The woman first felt the terrible stench of his breath, and then felt the cold blade pressed against her delicate neck. "George!" she screamed, and George immediately lost his guard, taking a crushing blow to the jaw and falling to his knees. "No, oh!" Catherine cried out in a burst of desperation and kicked the villain in the groin with all her might. Despite the pain in her stomach, she couldn't let the criminals deal with her husband like this before her eyes. "Finish him, guys," the tall guy shouted, and he and the fat man began kicking George in the stomach and head. Catherine managed to break free from the brute's deadly grip for a second. However, he managed to slash her across the chest with the razor. Lowering her head, the girl saw a crimson stream soak her light dress. "Come here!" The scoundrel roared and plunged the weapon directly into her stomach with a short, precise thrust. The surrounding world instantly turned into one large, blurry spot for the woman. The pain was so unbearable that Catherine forgot how to breathe. Whispering her husband's name one last time, she fell and plunged somewhere into utter darkness. With the edge of her consciousness, Catherine managed to catch the wail of police sirens. Apparently, the restaurant staff had heard the noise and called the police. An ambulance also arrived with them, but Catherine no longer saw this. Sticky, cold darkness surrounded her from all sides. "Catherine, Kathy, can you hear me, my dear? It's me, your husband, George." With great difficulty, Catherine opened her eyes. Above her was a perfectly white ceiling, which at first even blinded her with light. Nearby, she heard an unpleasant beeping sound. Medical devices were monitoring her condition. Smith felt a long plastic tube inserted in her nose, through which cool air was supplied. Then she felt someone gently and tenderly squeezing her hand. "George," she said very weakly, "is that really you? Alive?" Her husband's face, leaning over her, confirmed, "It's me, my tough nut. Thank God, but you scared me terribly, my dear. I thought I had lost you." It took Catherine half a second to recall all the events that preceded her stay in the hospital. "The baby!" the young woman exclaimed in a pale voice and immediately pressed her hand to her stomach. It was completely flat and tightly bandaged. "Our baby, George. What about him?" she asked her husband, already sensing the worst. Instead of answering, the man just lowered his eyes, then nervously ruffled his hair with a jerky movement. "The doctors fought so hard for your life, they had no choice. Our baby couldn't be saved anyway. I'm so sorry, my dear, so sorry." "No, not that, it can't be." Catherine broke into hysterics. Just then, the attending physician rushed into the ward. "What have you done?" The elderly surgeon looked angrily at George, simultaneously trying to restrain the woman thrashing in convulsions. "Who gave you permission to tell the patient such news when she herself is hanging by a thread? Leave the ward immediately. Nurse, bring me a sedative quickly." The doctor addressed the nurse who ran up. "It's better to tell her immediately," George said grimly, struggling to get up from the chair. "It would have been even more painful later." The surgeon looked at him, then shook his head sternly. "I understand everything. You're both in shock, but that didn't give you the right to risk your wife's health like that." George seemed to let the surgeon's words pass him by. He looked at the sobbing Catherine with a feeling of absolute hopelessness. His beloved was practically dying, and she had also lost their child, and he, an employee of the rescue service, couldn't prevent it. "Catherine, I'll come back tomorrow," her husband said with tears in his eyes and left the ward. The most difficult part for Catherine was yet to come. After a long and agonizing recovery, the doctor delivered a devastating verdict. Due to the injuries sustained, she would never be able to have children again. The young woman was absolutely crushed. Having returned home, Catherine didn't remember what was happening around her. All the days merged into one bleak gray streak. George tried to reach his wife, to shake her out of this comatose state, but it was all in vain. Her parents, no less devastated by their daughter's condition than her husband, also tried to talk to Catherine. However, she didn't react to anything at all. No one, except George and her family, knew how hard it was for Catherine to get up every morning to return to at least a semblance of herself. Only after almost a year was she able to consciously perceive reality again. The pain of losing the child was still too fresh to completely forget what she had gone through, and the woman's abdomen now forever bore the marks of that monstrous evening. Scars. Catherine hid them under dark and thick clothing. She could no longer wear a swimsuit or a light summer dress. It seemed strangers would stare at her horrific cuts. Even with George, she now behaved coldly and reservedly. And she didn't blame him for what had happened in any way, but she knew what torment he himself was experiencing, and therefore no longer considered displays of their love appropriate. At least, not until this whole story finally dissolved into the everyday reality of their ongoing life. To recover and distract herself from the unbearable sadness, Catherine returned to work. Despite the unbearable pain of seeing other children every day, the woman increasingly found herself thinking that she was slowly, little by little, feeling better. The pain very slowly receded somewhere to the very bottom of her soul, leaving behind only calmness bordering on indifference. For a start, even this was a salvation for Catherine. And then, just when she seemed to have found stable ground beneath her feet, her whole world again shattered into tiny pieces from which she could no longer assemble anything. This happened exactly 3 years ago. A year before Catherine finally moved to Yelchika, George had gone on a business trip somewhere north to Siberia. Terrible fires were raging there, and Catherine's husband, along with other rescue service employees, was called to fight the fire from helicopters by dropping a special suspension. The most terrible thing, for which Catherine constantly blamed herself, was that she felt absolutely nothing. She calmly let her beloved husband, the only person dear to her, go on that cursed business trip. 2 days after George left, she received a call from an unknown number. "Ah, Catherine Smith?" a strange male voice said on the phone. "Yes, this is she. Who am I speaking with?" This is Captain David Lawson of the Emergency Response Unit. Your husband, George Smith." Catherine's heart immediately dropped somewhere into her stomach. It became difficult not just to speak, but even to think. "Yes," the woman replied barely audibly. "Dr. Smith, be strong. Your husband died heroically while fighting a fire in a forest belt." Catherine felt the floor beneath her slowly move sideways. Grabbing onto the edge of the table to keep from falling, the pediatrician asked again, "What do you mean, died?" "No, there must be a mistake. He only left 2 days ago. I'm very sorry," the captain said a little softer. "Your husband's helicopter got into a difficult situation. One of the blades failed, after which the aircraft fell into the river. We found the body of one of the pilots immediately, but your husband, he was probably carried away by the current downstream. Our divers are already checking the area there." Something inside Catherine twitched weakly, perhaps the last strands of her nerves. "Wait! Are you saying George's body hasn't been found yet? But that could mean he had a chance. Perhaps he's still alive. Maybe he was washed ashore somewhere and needs help." A sad sigh was heard on the phone. "If only it were that simple, Dr. Smith," Lawson replied. "The height they fell from was considerable, plus the damage to the helicopter was such that, in short, if I were you, I wouldn't have any special illusions. But our team is doing everything necessary to search the area as effectively as possible." Catherine replied to the captain coldly and decisively. "Fortunately, Captain, you are not in my place and you are unlikely to ever be. I will come on the first available flight. I want to personally participate in the search for my husband." "Come now, Dr. Smith. You don't need all this, honestly," Lawson warned her in a fatherly tone. However, the rescuer's wife was a straightforward person when it came to preserving her family. "Let me decide what I should and shouldn't do, Captain. Give me the address and I'll come." Having warned her parents and superiors, the woman set off into the heart of the taiga. Together with the members of the search and rescue team, Catherine traversed the forests there back and forth, but alas, she found no trace of George. "I told you you were just upsetting yourself for nothing," Captain Lawson complained about Catherine's arrival. "You didn't really achieve anything." "No," Catherine told him firmly. "My husband will be considered missing until you find his body. Only then will I accept that he died. Until then, you must continue the search for as long as possible." An exhausted Catherine returned to Moscow, and the search for her husband continued for several more months. However, it was all in vain. Finally, the woman made a difficult decision: to abandon everything in the capital and move permanently to a remote taiga village. This happened to be Yelchika. "Daughter, my dear, think again," her mother, Angelica Smith, pleaded, devastated by the situation. "I understand that the grief of losing Georgie will forever remain in your heart, but you want to leave not just your job and home, you want to leave us too." The elderly mother held back tears with her last ounce of strength. Mom, forgive me, but this is the only thing I truly need right now, the pediatrician explained. I can't stay here anymore. Everything reminds me of George and how much we had, how much connected us, and how much we lost. Angelica Smith looked at her daughter with an attentive, understanding gaze. Promise me you'll at least write to me then, her mother asked pleadingly. Of course, Mommy, my dearest, her daughter assured, hugging the elderly woman. As soon as I settle in, I'll write. I've already made arrangements with the local hospital. They're taking me right into my specialty. Can you imagine? The staff there is very small, about 10 people, so I don't have to worry about rumors concerning me. Oh, my dear, rumors are such a disease, Angelica Smith said, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. Even if you don't want them, they'll appear out of thin air. You're a new person to them, so at first they won't trust you. They'll be watching. Be patient for a little while. Maybe you'll fit into their lives. Just write to me, my dear. Don't forget about your mother and father. Catherine hugged her mother tenderly and promised that she would definitely be all right. The next morning, she was already sitting on a plane, taking her to distant, unknown Siberian lands. When Catherine woke up the next morning after a difficult night full of dreams mixed with memories, her head ached so much that the woman didn't know what to do. After taking 2 painkiller tablets, Catherine somehow made her way to the clinic, hoping that the fresh air and the scent of forest herbs would cheer her up a little. However, as soon as she started delving into the documents, the milkmaid Vera burst into the office. Dr. Smith, help us out. You're the only hope left, Vera said, breathless from running. Vera, what's wrong? Calm down, catch your breath. Shall I get you some water? No time. The fair-haired plump woman waved her hand. Get ready. Where to? Catherine didn't understand. Cassie Miller, our healer Agnes's granddaughter, is very ill. I was at their place the other day, out there in the forest. Vera vaguely gestured around the space. Cassie was already, you could say, fading before my eyes then. And this morning I brought them milk, and Agnes instructed me saying, call your doctor here. My remedies aren't helping. Catherine had heard something about the local hermit Agnes Miller. The elderly woman, who was rumored to be over 100, rarely appeared in the village, preferring to buy groceries through local residents. Catherine didn't approve of visits to the healer, but she couldn't do anything about it. From a young age, they were accustomed to consulting her on women's matters. The only thing Smith hoped for was that they would be smart enough not to entrust their lives and the lives of their children to the midwife. Not long ago, however, a rumor spread in the village that Agnes had a granddaughter. But no matter how hard Catherine tried to visit her herself to check on the baby, she couldn't find the old witch's forest hut. And Agnes's daughter, Ellie, flatly refused to see doctors. She and her grandmother, as Catherine understood, were generally against modern technology and medicine. But you've harmed the child with your herbs, Catherine exclaimed anxiously and immediately got ready to go. How old is this Cassie anyway? Vera thought for a moment. She's very small, about a year old at most. Even better, Smith said, shaking her head. Vera, can you take me there to Agnes's? Every time I try to go, I get lost. Vera looked at the pediatrician strangely, then quietly mumbled, Strange. Somewhere. Interesting, the milkmaid replied louder. All right, just follow me step for step. The area is swampy. It's easy to stumble. Half an hour later, the women were walking through the impenetrable forest thicket. Vera walked easily and briskly, almost flying over snags and sharp branches that seemed to avoid the village resident. For Catherine, this journey turned into a real hell. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, where the neat hut of the miller stood, Catherine felt completely drained, and she was also scratched all over by the trees and bushes there. Here we are, Vera said contentedly, pointing to the healer's house. With your permission, I'll go home. I still have 1,000 chores to do around the house. Of course, go, Catherine nodded. Thank you for your help. It's amazing how I couldn't find their house all this time. It seems like it's not a long walk, but every time I seem to get off track. Vera glanced at Catherine slightly suspiciously. Who knows why the old witch wouldn't let her near her house, Vera thought on the way back. It means she thought it was necessary. Maybe she felt competition. After all, Catherine was a doctor, and a real one at that. Agnes and Ellie never liked doctors. Catherine, left alone, hurried up to the porch and quietly knocked on the slightly open door. No one answered the pediatrician. Then she decided to enter without an invitation. The atmosphere inside was most mystical, as if Catherine had come to visit Baba Yaga. Bunches of various herbs hung everywhere, jars with incomprehensible preserves stood around, and there was a sharp scent of juniper and spruce needles. The young woman went into the living room, hoping that the sick child was somewhere there. The room was ascetic. An old oak table, a couple of chairs, a kerosene lamp, a chest of drawers, and a couple of framed photographs. One showed a girl in a sundress-like dress, similar to those burned in effigy during Maslenitsa in the spring. She stood embracing a very old, wrinkled woman like a dried olive. Apparently these were Agnes and her daughter Ellie. My God, how old is Ellie then? Catherine thought in surprise. If it's true that her mother is 100, then this woman is definitely a witch, and she even managed to have a child. Catherine put the photograph back and looked at the second picture. And then something inside her seemed to break all at once. What did you come for? A cawing old voice sounded from behind. If I had my way, you'd still be wandering in the swamps, but it seems a desperate situation has arisen today. The taiga itself let you through to me. Smith slowly turned to face the healer, meeting the gaze of her unkind black eyes like a raven's pupils. Agnes turned out to be miniature, less than half of Catherine's height, but she looked determined and a little hostile. Where did you get this? Catherine asked, pointing to the second photograph. There, with a thick beard and long hair, stood her George. Of course, he had changed a lot in appearance, become rougher, his gaze had become unsociable, but it was definitely him. You will put that thing back, the old woman said strictly. It's not yours, so there's no need to look. Catherine's lips trembled with a fine tremor. Her knees instantly went weak, turning to cotton, just like when she had tried to run away from the bandit. I won't do anything until you tell me where you got this photo, Catherine almost shouted into the healer's face. The woman chewed her colorless, dry lips for a moment, then finally replied, You'd better ask him. You'll see him soon. He went to the city after you too, but you missed each other. God knows that's your fate. Agnes sighed heavily, then asked with emphasis, Well, are you going to treat the child for me or not? Why did I call you here? Catherine seemed to wake up from a long sleep. Everything inside her trembled. Show me your granddaughter. The doctor finally nodded and followed the healer into a small room, the ceiling of which was even lower than in the living room. Here, in a tiny crib, lay a small, pale girl. Only her cheeks burned with an unusually bright blush. Is this Cassie? Catherine asked, immediately getting to work. She examined the baby and stared at Agnes in horror. Well? She's been sick like this since the day before yesterday, and she's only getting worse. I don't understand why my remedies aren't helping. Do you understand that your granddaughter has pneumonia? Catherine asked loudly, her eyes flashing. The girl needs hospitalization immediately. Thank God Vera brought me to you. A little longer, and you would have lost the child. Do you understand that? The healer's face wrinkled even more, as if she had bitten into a sour apple. Don't yell, I understand, the old woman replied submissively. No, I'm just curious where her mother is, Catherine asked, looking angrily at the elderly woman. To have let it get this bad. That's it. Now it's just IV fluids and praying that Cassie recovers. The child made a weak sound under the pediatrician's hands. Oh my God, she's burning up, the woman said, and took a syringe and an ampule of medicine from her bag. And what is that? Agnes asked distrustfully, looking at the ampule. Are you going to inject her? Microchip my granddaughter? I won't allow it. And the healer blocked Catherine's access to the crib. Calm down. This is a standard fever reducer used in such cases for children, Catherine replied confidently, looking her in the eyes. The old woman hesitated but eventually moved aside, allowing her granddaughter to be given the injection. Now she should start feeling better, Catherine said and looked at the healer. What words you know? Microchip my granddaughter. Imagine that. And how am I supposed to know what's in the heads of you newcomers? The healer asked with indignation. Look, Ellie, my adopted daughter went into the forest the day before yesterday and hasn't returned. Maybe your colleagues took her for experiments? The next moment, large tears rolled down Agnes's eyes. Catherine realized that the woman was not entirely in her right mind, and it would be better if she took the girl to the hospital. Amidst all these thoughts, the pediatrician almost forgot about the mysterious photograph. However, in the next minute, the solution to this mystery appeared in person. Doctor, is she all right? George asked with unconcealed anxiety. I was practically begging Agnes on my knees to let me call a real doctor here. Catherine carefully turned to the man, trying not to faint herself. Her lost husband stood right before her, exactly as he was in that photograph. George, was all Catherine, pale as a sheet, could say. Tell me it's true. Is it you? Am I not imagining things? The man looked at her for a minute with a look of complete incomprehension. Then a spark of recognition flickered in his eyes, and then he grabbed the door to keep from collapsing. Memories crashed into his mind like a snow avalanche. Zachary, haven't you ever seen our village doctor? The old woman asked, shifting her gaze from Catherine to George and back. Why is she calling you George? Did they call you that in your past life? And then Agnes looked closely at the pediatrician and only then said with displeasure, So it was you he was calling for in his delirium back then? And I was wondering why I didn't like you right away. I felt you were connected, but I didn't think it was so close that your thread stretched across the whole country. Catherine, my dear, it's me, George. You see everything correctly, my dear. How could I forget everything? Regardless of the distance, George covered the space in 2 wide strides to his wife, who was crying with happiness, and squeezed her in a tight embrace. I knew it! I knew it! I knew you were alive, George. I talked to you every night, prayed for you. I felt that you didn't crash in the helicopter then. But who? Agnes and Ellie? And how did you end up here? Her husband looked at her with anxiety, but with boundless love, then said, I'll tell you everything, I promise. But please, let's take my daughter to the hospital first. I'm very worried about her condition. Daughter? Catherine said in surprise and recoiled from George. So Ellie had a child with you? A tense silence hung between the spouses for a minute. Then Catherine managed to compose herself and said somewhat dryly, Yes, you're right. A child's life is paramount. Taking the girl in his arms, the man hurried out of the hut. He easily led Catherine out of the forest thicket, back to the village, and under the surprised glances of the villagers, carried his daughter straight to the hospital. When Cassie had received all the necessary help and Catherine was assured that the baby's life was not in danger, she sank tiredly onto a small sofa in her office. Can we talk? George said quietly, entering. Catherine raised her eyes, red from worry and tears, to him. Is there anything left for us to talk about? She asked in a colorless voice. The man cautiously entered the office and locked the door behind him. Catherine, I have so much to tell you, he began, and before that, I want to assure you, if I could have remembered even one day of our life earlier, I would have immediately returned to you in Moscow, honestly. The woman smiled sadly in response. Apparently you were so well here that you didn't even have to remember anything. Nothing stirred in your soul while you were hiding with these forest witches? Her husband took her hands and made her look him in the face. No, Catherine, you misunderstood everything. I just couldn't remember anything, do you understand? I couldn't. And George began his sad story. I was carried by the blast wave directly into the river. I don't really remember how it happened. I just felt a strong jolt and a few seconds of free fall and then cold and pain. When Agnes found me on the bank, I was badly injured, unconscious. She and her daughter Ellie managed to drag me to the hut, and there, the man sighed nervously. I spent 6 months there, practically unconscious. These women nursed me back to health. Whatever anyone says, some of their concoctions do have incredible healing power. I don't know, maybe it was something like a coma. And only when I finally fully woke up, I was like a blank slate, you see? I didn't even remember my name, I didn't know who I was. George rubbed the bridge of his nose, as if wanting to erase everything terrible from his memory. Catherine listened without interrupting. She wanted to know the whole truth, all of it. I learned to walk again. Something is wrong with my back. I can't always keep my balance now. But it's not terrible if I don't try to run too fast and don't carry too heavy a load. My daughter doesn't count, he added, and lowered his eyes. Ellie was with me from the very beginning. She nursed me, fed me with a spoon. In short, brought me back to life. I'm sorry, but that's the truth. A bitter smile appeared on Catherine's face. How touching. The woman silently admitted to herself that she was tormented by jealousy. And then I started walking again solely because I had completely lost my memory. I decided to stay here for a while until I remembered who I was and if I had a family. Naturally, I helped the women around the house, hunted, but I did all this without leaving the forest, you see. Agnes convinced me that I might be a fugitive criminal, and then there would surely be a wanted poster at the police station. I tried to explain, George said to his wife. There was one, Catherine replied absently. Only on that poster you were listed as missing. Catherine covered her face with her hands, unable to process the information. Oh God, I searched for you for so long and you… I'm alive, George replied firmly. I'm alive and sitting here, trying to explain everything to you. But how will you explain your daughter? His wife brought him to the main point. George looked somewhere into the distance, lost in thought for a moment. I love Cassie very much and want to take her with me when this is all over and she fully recovers. It was a moment of weakness, Catherine. You have to understand. I didn't remember anything, absolutely nothing. And Ellie was so kind to me. When she said she was pregnant, I realized that no matter what happened, I would take care of my daughter. His wife turned away. She didn't want George to see her face. Only Ellie is no longer here, Kathy. What? The woman didn't understand. Ellie is gone? Remember Agnes said she went into the forest and hadn't been home for 3 days? Well, I found her today. What happened to her? Catherine whispered, sensing something bad. She's dead, George replied shortly. Oh God, Catherine exclaimed and covered her mouth with her hands to keep from screaming. How did it happen? Her husband rubbed his palms, sweaty with fear. Catherine had never seen him so frightened. Apparently she went to gather herbs and berries, but, in short, it was a bear. I only recognized her by her dress and her basket. Catherine felt her legs grow cold. Are you going to tell Agnes? George just shook his head. I suspect she's already guessed. Let her think her daughter drowned in the swamp rather than learn such a terrible truth from me. They have slightly different concepts of death here. I buried Ellie right there in the forest. So Agnes, God willing, won't stumble upon her. The taiga gave, and the taiga took back. Agnes said she found Ellie as a lonely teenager. She was supposedly hiding in the forest from her stepfather, so she took the girl in. Don't be angry with her, Catherine. She was truly a very good person. What? How can I be now that I've learned this? Catherine felt shame burning inside her mercilessly. Alas, only after the news of Ellie's death could she see her as a person who saved her husband's life, not a cunning seductress. Kathy, George asked quietly, let's leave here when Cassie gets better. Shall we leave? You can forgive me, can't you? Catherine looked into her husband's blue eyes and in the same second made the only right decision. Of course, George, I'm still your wife. And so it happened. As soon as little Cassie recovered, George and Catherine, quickly packing up, were ready that same evening to board a bus to the nearest airport from where a helicopter could take them to the mainland, and from there they could get to Moscow by regular plane. George wanted to go say goodbye to Agnes when Vera shocked him with tragic news. It turned out the old healer had passed away the night before. Apparently, she couldn't bear the loss of her daughter, the milkmaid suggested. And her age too. No one knew exactly how old Agnes Miller was. Catherine shed a tear upon hearing about the old woman's death. However she felt about her and her unconventional methods, she never wished her such a fate. "Don't worry, Dr. Smith," Vera assured her. "We'll give Agnes a proper burial, according to Christian custom." The pediatrician thanked the kind village woman and, saying goodbye to everyone except the persistent paramedic Spencer, left with her husband and Cassie back to the capital. Upon returning home, their first act was to officially adopt little Cassie and restore all of George's documents. Catherine's parents were happy to learn that their son-in-law was alive after all. They held a big celebration for the occasion, and Cassie became the long-awaited granddaughter they had wished for, arriving almost 10 years after their daughter's wedding. George returned to work at the rescue service, but due to his injury, he could no longer work in the field, so he returned to what he had started with. Now he consults and trains young recruits. He is now full of strength and energy, wanting to make his life calmer and more constructive, dedicating most of his time to raising his daughter and his beloved wife. Catherine continued working at the clinic, returning to her previous duties. She, as before, treats children, only now her own little daughter awaits her at home, whom she loves more than life itself and for whom she thanks God every day. Thus, having gone through a series of misfortunes and trials, the Smith family finally found a second chance at happiness, and this time they are not going to let it slip away.